Thank you all for joining us this evening. Bienvenue à tous et à toutes ce soir. Nous sommes ravis de vous revoir si nombreux. Happy to see so many of you signing into this webinar today. My name is Alex Defto. I am the CAO's Manager of Outreach and Communications, and I will be your moderator. Before we begin, I think it's important to pause for a moment and acknowledge that the land that the CAO is broadcasting from is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Dish with One Spoon territory in Treaty 13 of the Mississaugas of the Credit. We're so glad to have you as we explore conflict management and de-escalation in condo communities with our guest panel. I just wanted to start off with a few housekeeping items before we dive in. So as we speak today, we will be sprinkling in polling questions that we hope you will answer so we can get to know you a little bit better. The webinar will conclude at 6:45 p.m. this evening. You can ask us a question anytime through the Q&A function, and we will try to get to as many of your questions as we can. We also have some questions that people have sent in ahead of time. We'll be prioritizing questions about conflict management in condos, but we'll post responses to other frequently asked questions on our website and social media channels after the webinar, likely tomorrow or early next week. We ask that you please only ask us one question so that we can try to address as many people's questions as possible tonight. And you don't need to worry about taking notes or anything like that, because we'll share any takeaways, resources, and best practices we learn here tonight together through a thank you email to participants tomorrow during the day. So we look forward to spending this hour with you. And without further ado, I'm going to pass it on to our CEO, Robin Defo.
Thank you, Alex. Good evening. I'm Robin Defo, the CEO and Registrar of the CAO. On behalf of the board and staff at the Condominium Authority, I want to thank you for taking time out of your evening to join us for this timely and important conversation. The CAO is here to help condo boards, managers, and owners navigate the complexities of condo living. And tonight we're hosting a panel of experts to talk about steps that can be taken to help achieve our collective vision for strong and vibrant condominium communities across Ontario. We know condo safety has been on all our minds in recent months, especially since the tragic and senseless events in Vaughan in December. Our goal this evening is to focus on ways to support safe and respectful condo communities, which are essential for enjoying condo living. Everyone should have the right to feel safe, welcome, and respected. And with this right comes the responsibility for everyone to make an effort, be considerate, and be accountable for their actions and contribute to their community in a positive way. The CAO team here has been working to put together this webinar to support all of you who live in, govern, and manage condos throughout Ontario. We're very excited to present the expert panel we brought together this evening to share their insights and best practices on conflict resolution, de-escalation, and mental health. Tonight, you'll hear from Celia Chandler, a housing expert with a background in human rights law and mental health. She has been on our condo board and is also a member of our Condominium Authority Tribunal. You'll hear from Benjamin Tabesh, the CEO of Condor Security, and a conflict resolution expert who will talk to you about de-escalation strategies. Benjamin's company provides security services for several condominium corporations. And lastly, Paul Duffy, the Director of Policy in our CAO office, and he will be providing you with details of recent updates to the CAO's online resources and training and materials. And he will be asking for your input into how the CAO can gather some insights so that we might support you further in these areas. The CAO's mission is to strengthen Ontario's condominium community by supporting condo owners, boards, directors, and residents with information, education, and dispute resolution through our online digital services. Tonight's session is one in a series that we have planned to bring together expertise and best practices to the condo sector in Ontario, and with the goal, as I said, of gathering insights from you to serve you better. And now let's get started with what is sure to be a very fruitful conversation tonight. And thank you for joining us. Back to you, Alex.
Thank you so much, Robin. Okay, great. Wanted to add a little disclaimer to that. Our external expert panels today are participating in this webinar in their private capacity. They're not presenting on behalf of the CAO or the CAT. So all aspects of their involvement are offered by them alone. And the very last thing before we start is our first poll of the night. This is just a general question to try to get to know our audience a little bit better. So when you see it pop up on your screen, please vote accordingly, and we'd love to get to know you a bit more. Okay, I see everybody voting. That's great. Lots of directors. We'd love to see it. Lots of board directors, lots of managers. Excellent. Okay, so let's jump right in. We'll go to our experts. Maybe we'll begin with Celia first. So Celia, I wonder if you could tell us what is the Human Rights Code and why it's important when we discuss conflict management in condos.
Sure, Alex, I'd be happy to. And thanks so much for inviting me to participate tonight. The Human Rights Code takes priority over all other legislation in the province. That includes the Condominium Act and any other act. The Human Rights Code also takes priority over a condo's internal documents, and perhaps also important, it takes priority over individuals' personal preferences, or what I call human wants. So what does the Human Rights Code say about housing? It says that people in housing are entitled to equal treatment and to be free from harassment and discrimination on the basis of personal characteristics called grounds. And those things include things like race, sex, gender identity, and for the purposes of tonight's discussion, disability, which includes mental health and addiction. So under the code, housing providers, including condos, have a duty to accommodate a disability, and that includes a mental health disability. An accommodation is when you give to one person something you don't give to everyone else, so that they have a similar housing experience. So you achieve something like equity, but not equality. So not everyone's getting the same thing. And a very simple example of that accommodation is if a person who has a visual impairment has a guide dog, but a condominium has a rule that prohibits dogs, that rule has to bend in order to allow that dog to live there. And I think that's something we're all pretty familiar with. That accommodation, though, also applies for mental health disability. So it's a collaborative process. Both the condo and the person needing accommodation have to be involved in that process. And I know you've got lots more great questions for me, so I'm going to leave that one there.
Thank you. That's quite interesting to learn about human rights, which is such an important piece of cohabitation. So can you tell us a bit more about how we can use that as a buttress to come to collaborative solutions in condo settings?
Sure. So I'm going to do that by giving you an example. So I made this example up, but this could happen in any condo situation. Let's assume we have an owner named Tom, and he lives in unit 405. And we have people living in 305 and 505, so above and below him, who complain about hearing nighttime screaming coming from Tom's unit. They knock on his door, it doesn't seem to stop. So of course they raise the issue with the condominium manager, and the manager has a chat with Tom, who first denies, but subsequently agrees that it might have been him. And he discloses he suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder. And he has a doctor's note that explains he has night terrors sometimes that stop when he wakes up. So this is a well-educated condo, and they know they have a duty to accommodate a mental health disability like post-traumatic stress disorder, and that duty to accommodate takes priority over their internal documents related to noise and nuisance. So they also understand they have an obligation to be collaborative in working out a decision or some kind of resolution rather. So they have a meeting with their lawyer and Tom's lawyer, and they talk about how they might reduce the sound from happening, and then how they might reduce the sound from traveling. So some of the things they discuss giving the neighbors his telephone number, obviously with his consent, so that they can call him when they hear the screaming. Hopefully it will wake him up, and that will resolve the sound. They also ask Tom to provide monthly evidence of ongoing therapy. to resolve underlying issues. Again, I mean, this is an agreement, right? So we expect to have him sign off on that. We're not requiring it. We're trying to come to an agreement that will resolve the issue. And then they also discuss having a sound expert come in to determine how the sound is traveling and how to mitigate some of that travel. So these are the kinds of things that occur when you come to a collaborative decision or a collaborative agreement, and that's the whole process of accommodation. I hope that's helpful.
That's very interesting. Yes, absolutely. So, and I know you mentioned this duty to accommodate, and we're also getting some questions in the chat related to this. Mm-hmm. So is there a limit to this accommodation?
Sure.
You know, which one, yeah, exactly. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question, and often that's what housing providers like condos want to know is how far do we have to go with this? So let's talk about an example where someone is hoarding. So hoarding, just for clarification, is when you acquire and retain excessive things. And it's often, although not always, caused by an underlying mental health disability. And so if that's the case, then the condominium has a duty to accommodate under the Human Rights Code. The human rights accommodation that a person who hoards is implicitly asking for is to live at a standard that's different from the expectation of other owners. But accommodation is not without a limit. It's to the point, condos have to accommodate to the point of what we call undue hardship. So note the word hardship is in there. There is a suggestion by the limit being undue hardship that accommodations will often involve hardship that is not undue, and therefore if it's not undue, the condo has to go to that extent. But how do we assess whether a hardship is undue? Well, there are two branches. There are two ways we can determine whether undue hardship exists. The first is cost. So if the cost is so extreme that it's going to fundamentally change the nature of the condo's ability to function, then the condo does not have to provide that accommodation. So it's a very high threshold. And the other one is if the accommodation being requested results in a significant health and safety risk, either to the person requesting it or to other people in the building, then the condo can claim it's an undue hardship and not proceed with the accommodation. So, long story, but I'm going to get to the point of how that applies in hoarding. So it is possible that a hoarding situation could be so extreme that it would result in a significant fire risk, and that would therefore constitute an undue hardship. It's the kind of assessment that I would recommend a condo have legal advice about, because that kind of assessment, if you're wrong, could result for the condo in some consequences with the Human Rights Tribunal and so on. The process of decluttering is an interesting one, and there are many, many good resources out there. The one that I have often used is called the Clutter Image Rating Scale, and if you Google those words, you will find a very helpful tool that helps assess the nature of a unit and then set targets for decluttering. So I hope that's helpful.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. Lots of great information in there. Another common question we see is, okay, so that's great. I think that delineates carefully what the duties are of the condo corporation. But what if someone in the condo who's living there, an owner, they clearly have a mental health disability, but they're maybe not aware of it, or they don't agree that they do when asked by the condo corporation. What's the duty there for condo corporations?
So this is really the tricky part, and what distinguishes mental health disability from other disabilities. So in fact, although typically we would say that if someone requires accommodation, they have to explicitly ask for it, as you've quite rightly said, sometimes people are not aware of their mental health disability, or even if they are aware, they're not open about it with others because of the stigma that's attached to mental health. So the issue, though, is that if a housing provider like a condo suspects that someone is suffering from a mental health disability, and that is resulting in some behavior that is contrary to this community standard as defined in its documents, then as long as there's a suspicion, then the duty to accommodate exists. Now, I know you're going to say, well, hey, we're not all mental health experts. Fair enough. That's probably the case. Condominium managers are not required to be mental health experts as well. However, I would say that most of us who've lived for a few years have some sense of the range of what most people, the way most people behave. And we also have some sense when someone is behaving in a way that's contrary to that, and that might be caused by a mental health disability. And so once those spidey senses are up, if you like, then it's you have to start engaging in some kind of process. And it's a much more complicated one when you don't have someone who's admitting to the mental health disability. But that's my advice on that.
Thank you. Lots of great information there. Thank you so much, Celia. Okay, so we've kind of looked at this from the legal perspective. I was hoping we could switch gears a little bit and approach the issue maybe from a practical lens. So Benjamin, over to you. I know that in your work, you often talk about de-escalation as a measure for security. So I was wondering if you could explain to the audience what you consider de-escalation.
Thank you, Alex, the CEO, and everyone who has joined the webinar here today. The goal of de-escalation is to build rapid rapport and a sense of connectedness with an agitated person in order to reduce the likelihood of escalation to physical violence or vicarious liability. This sense of connectedness is established through the use of specific verbal, psychological, and nonverbal techniques that we'll talk about today that emphasizes controlling one's own emotional response to threat while guiding communication. Sun Tzu, The Art of War, written 2,500 years ago, remains relevant to this day. Strategically, to approach conflict, it teaches that the greatest victories come when conflict is avoided in its entirety. I quote, "Those who win every battle are not skilled. Those who render other armies helpless without fighting are the best of all." Effective communication, effective de-escalation, ladies and gentlemen, can help you in all situations and are very relevant to people, particularly living in condo communities, where there are a large number of people living within a small area. Tensions can run very high when people are frustrated. As a condo manager, director, owner, or resident, conflict resolution and de-escalation provide a humane approach dealing with others, especially when people may act irrationally or when someone unfortunately is suffering from mental illness. De-escalation is all about prevention and mitigating potential risks. You're trying to gain their cooperation instead of resistance. I'll pass it back to Alex.
Thank you so much. I think that you've really important to understand what it is and also why it's important, which to your point, preventing and mitigating potential future risks. And so Ben, I also wanted to, I think, and we're getting some questions in the audience here similar to this. What can we do though when faced with someone who's in a crisis?
So first, let's talk about the importance of what de-escalation is. And I'm a very visual person. When we teach this course, we make it very visual. So I want everyone to close their eyes for a moment. And I want everyone to imagine you're a matador in a ring. And there's a raging bull coming at you at full speed. What do? Do you put your hand out and do you scream? Or do you deflect and redirect that bull as the matador does? And ladies and gentlemen, it is no different when we're dealing with verbal conflict. Now, we're going to use some deflection words, things like appreciate it, but I understand that. However, oh yes, therefore, I hear that. And how do you redirect? And here is how we can solve your problem together. Now, why are these important? Safety is number one. It's going to improve your safety. It's going to enhance your professionalism. It's going to decrease complaints, decrease vicarious liability, lessen stress. Most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, you may have to go to court and articulate. It will help you with that as well. And it's going to improve the outcome. Now, let's talk about what we can do. First and foremost, we need to avoid being natural. Ladies and gentlemen, our natural reaction when we're dealing with conflict, it equals confrontation. We do not want that. It's going to increase the tension level and it's going to escalate the situation. Instead, you need to start by being an active listener, which means you need to be open and unbiased. You hear what that person in front of you is saying literally. Interpret their words accurately. Remember, you need to use that information to act. Now, we're going to talk about some principles. The first principle we're going to talk about is LEAPS, L-E-A-P-S. Listen, empathize, paraphrase. Listen, empathize, ask, paraphrase, and summarize. So what's listening? A key component of listening is to understand the problem and to be able to enable you to respond effectively. Empathize. Ladies and gentlemen, I cannot stress how important the power of empathy is when we're dealing with conflict. Show that you care about the situation, even though that you don't care. Don't prejudge and try not to disapprove. Ask. Asking questions to figure out what is important and to show that you're concerned and you want to help them. Paraphrase, very powerful tool. Put the facts as you see them in your own words to show that you understand what that person is saying. And lastly, summarize. Be brief and decisive and communicate the action that you're going to take as your next step. There are other variations of this de-escalation technique, but I found LEAPS to be very effective. I'm going to pass it back to you, Alex.
Thank you, Ben. It's really interesting that you and Celia are coming at this from different perspectives, but really coming at, I think, similar conclusions, which is, we need to be listening and trying to diffuse. And there's, different strategies for that. You can go the legal route or you can do the verbal judo, as you say. Getting some excellent questions here in the chat. I think it was Brian was asking, what should directors and managers, what can they do if they recognize that de-escalation might no longer be an option? Are there resources they can go to, or is there some other strategy they can employ?
Definitely there is. Now, I think it's important when we need to act, and I want to talk about that right now before I'm going to answer that question. And I'm going to go back to our human rights elemented society. Unfortunately, when we're dealing with conflict, we fail to exercise some of those human rights habits. There's 5 principles that we talk about over here. Everyone needs to be treated with dignity and respect. Everyone wants to be asked rather than being told to do something. All people want to be told why they're asked to be told to do something. All people want to be given options rather than threats. And most importantly, everyone wants a second chance. So to answer your question, there's 5 steps that we need to follow before we're going to get into that stage of either we act or we disengage. Have you asked the person to comply with you? That's number 1. Did you explain to them the reason why they need to comply with you? Did you give them options? Did you tell them, hey, if you don't do this, I'm going to do this? That's a threat. You're going to get resistance. Doesn't matter how nice or not nice that person is. Did you confirm? Is there anything that I can do to gain your cooperation, sir or ma'am, at this time? I like to think so. Then we can get to our act. In our business, it's called actions consistent with training. In that case, it could be disengage or escalate. Now, what's escalation? Escalation means using your resources. And to answer your question, there is a lot of resources available. So one of those resources that is available if you live in the Greater Toronto Area is the Toronto Community Crisis Services, or dial 211. These are non-police response to mental health crisis team. They conduct well-being checks. You have resources like the police that you can contact. So again, it's important that you don't prematurely act in these types of situations, that you go through these steps, you give that person the opportunity to comply before you're going to disengage with them. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you, Ben. Lots of really great resources there, lots of great takeaways. And just as a reminder to everybody, the recording of this webinar will be posted on our website and also on our social media channels. And we will also be sending out a summary of all of the resources and tactics that we've talked about today. And speaking of tactics, I would like to switch gears again to our third panelist, Paul Duffy. Paul, I know your team here at the CIO has been very busy launching helpful resources for condo communities. I think our audience, it's important for our audience to understand what's out there already. So do you mind talking a little bit more about that? How has the CIO been supporting condo communities so they can handle these types of issues better?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Alex, and thanks to everyone who's joined tonight. So just want to start with, we've got a number of existing and refreshed resources, whether you're a director, manager, or owner. So we have our advanced director training guides, and they have some basic principles and a checklist for boards to support harmonious condominium living. Specifically, those would be the governance and issues management guides. You can also go to our website, and we have a guided steps section, and this is guided steps to resolving a whole number of common issues that arise in condominium living, including harassment. We have a mental health resources page. So if you go to the mental health resources page, there's direct links to specialists for a whole variety of situations that can support you or others with mental health needs. But I think the biggest thing I'd say is, we're always looking to support the condominium community. That's why we're here. That's why we're asking the poll question. So if you take a look at those resources and you think, there's still something that's missing, please get in touch with us and we'll look to develop it and support you in the future.
Great. Thank you so much, Paul. And so, and this question is coming up in the chat a lot as well. So what would the CIO suggest corporations do to handle these types of issues on top of what everybody else has suggested today?
Sure. So first thing I'd say is, condominiums aren't a one-size-fits-all type of entity, right? So what works in your 200-unit tower might not be the same thing that works in a 14-unit townhouse complex. And talk to your residents, right? I mean, work in your community to figure out what might work best. But some examples, right? So you might find specific wording in your governing documents is going to give you recourse. Some condominiums just are able to resolve these issues simply with keeping communications lines open and collaborative. And there was a question about this earlier, and some communities are going to adapt a harassment policy. So we've prepared some guiding steps, and I mentioned these are in the advanced training guides, and you'll get a link to these later, but I will read them out. So guiding principles to steer you in the right direction, right? So it's important to promote positive behavior, not tolerate any form of harassment, including bullying, discrimination, or sexual harassment from any individual, not tolerate any form of aggressive behaviors or violence from any individual, regularly communicating the condo's commitment to safe and respectful environment. So that could be posting these principles in a public area. It could be repeating these principles before every meeting. You're going to want to resolve issues early and identify risks, intervene as necessary to prevent inappropriate behavior, and address inappropriate behavior with appropriate steps and consequences. And again, if you didn't get all that, it will be access to the guides tomorrow.
Thank you so much, Paul. We got lots of questions about other resources that people can use. So I know we talked about CIO stuff. Perhaps Ben and Celia, if you can also weigh in terms of learning more about the human rights, Celia especially, is there anywhere where you would suggest that folks go to?
Yeah, Alex, there's some really great resources out there. And We've just scratched the surface tonight, so I would encourage people to take a look at some of the resources I'm going to mention now. So the Human Rights Commission website is excellent, and they have 3 policies that I would really draw people's attention to. The first is the policy on human rights and mental housing. Don't be fooled. It relates to housing generally. Excellent resource. Then there's the policy preventing discrimination based on mental health disabilities and addictions, which obviously is quite germane to tonight's discussion. And then the final one from the Human Rights Commission that I would suggest people take a look at is the policy on competing human rights. And I've noticed in the Q&A tab, there are a number of questions being posed around competing human rights. So clearly it's an issue that people are thinking about. And it really is, it's situations where one person's human rights collide with another. And an obvious example of that is if a person has a guide dog and somebody else has a serious allergy to dogs, then that's 2 disabilities that are colliding. And so the policy on competing human rights actually sets out a process for trying to resolve that kind of situation. So the other place I would suggest people take a look beyond the Human Rights Commission is the Canadian Centre for Housing Rights. And some of you may know that as CERA, but they've recently changed their name. And they have published a guide for condo boards on the Human Rights Code. And that was just published last fall. It's a very, very good resource. I recommend people take a look. The last place, and yes, I used to be a lawyer, so I'm going to sound a bit self-serving, but there are some of these issues really do benefit from consulting with legal counsel. And so I know the condominium lawyers are very capable to work on these issues with you. And I would recommend you be in touch with them if situations get to the point where that's necessary. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that really thorough answer. I think that's really useful for everybody tonight. Ben, over to you. Same question. We've talked about a lot of things. If you could summarize some areas where folks can find out more and rely on in situations that we've talked about.
Definitely. Thanks, Alex. So we spoke about already the first organization, TCCS, Toronto Community Crisis Services. I did some research. I believe there's a question about Ottawa. Ottawa has its own version of that organization as well. It's called a distress center. Again, either by calling 211 or by calling their hotline, you're going to be able to have access to crisis workers that can assist you with dealing with mental health situations. Now, a big, in our world, training is very important. There's also training resources that boards and also managers and community members can exercise and participate in. Verbal judo is one of them. You also have EMO, which is Emergency Management Ontario, has various courses. You got Stay Safe, which is an organization that has courses on crisis intervention. And most importantly, as an underutilized resource are your local police departments. Now, Toronto has phased it out in majority of their divisions. There's still a number of divisions that have them. They're called your community liaison. City of Mississauga has them. Halton has them. And they're amazing resources because they're police who work with community members, and they will come and they'll do a seminar, and they're very well oriented with mental health and mental health issues, and that tied into your community safety. So I think those are some of the resources that are available. Again, depending on your municipality, there's resources that you can use locally. Again, in Toronto, the main organization that deals with this is TCCS.
Amazing. Thanks again, Ben. Okay, so I think we're ready to go to some audience questions. I will flag that we'd love to see it. We have so many questions. We're going to try to get to as many of them as we can, but we are short on time. So if you missed something from tonight, if you asked a question and we weren't able to get to it, we will be posting again both the recording also on our social media, on our YouTube, and on our website early next week. We will also follow up with those who attended with a poll to let us know, so that you can let us know what you thought about the event. And we will share a one-pager with takeaways from everything that the panelists shared. So no need to stress. I'm seeing some questions in the chat. No need to stress if you missed something. If you need to see something again, you'll get it in another format later. Okay, so got our first question here. Maybe we can go to Paul for this one. I live in a condo that does not have a condo manager, and I'm wondering what the role of the board is in dealing with harassment in our community.
Thanks, Alex. So all boards, whether you have a manager or not, have a statutory obligation to enforce your corporation's governing documents, which may include provisions related to harassment, and also any provisions in the Condo Act that relate to this type of behavior, right? So, for example, Section 117 of the Act prohibits anyone in the corporation, from doing anything that is likely to damage the property or assets, or to cause injury or illness to another individual, and anything that would causing an unreasonable nuisance, annoyance, or disruption. So, the CAO has some guiding principles that can help steer you that I referenced before, and that will be in the email you get, or links to them will be in the email. But another avenue you can consider is the Condominium Authority Tribunal. So, tribunal has jurisdiction over certain cases of harassment if the condo corporation has provisions in its governing documents that govern harassment, and if the harassment is causing a nuisance related to noise, odor, light, vibration, smoke, or vapor. If you haven't looked into the tribunal before, I think it's important to mention that there's also a mediation and arbitration process, so you can get another person in the room to help you discuss these issues before you advance to the adjudication step. The tribunal, however, cannot resolve disputes that have or could cause injury to a person or damage to the condo. If that's the case, it's probably best to seek your own legal advice.
Great, thank you so much, Paul. Okay, let's move right on. And actually, before we move on, I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge everybody who joined us here tonight. We've had almost 500 people join, which is amazing. It's really great to see, and I think that's a record for us. So super, super happy about that. Yeah, hope to have many more of these opportunities to connect with you guys. So this question, perhaps Celia can take the front end, and then Paul the back end. One of our tenants screams at night. So this is a tenant, not a condo owner. Screams at night, pulls fire alarms, and generally causes a lot of disruption in the building. What can we do to address this? And please note the unit owner, so their landlord, is a family member who refuses to take any action.
So thanks, Alex. It's a good question. It's not that dissimilar to my fictitious scenario with Tom. If we have behavior that is disruptive to others and is caused by a mental health disability, and we don't know in this scenario that that's the case, then that duty to accommodate that I talked about would arise. And whether it's an owner or a tenant, we still have obligations under the code because the person is in housing, and housing is covered by the Human Rights Code. Obviously, it's a little more complicated when there's a landlord in the middle, if the landlord isn't taking any steps. But it sounds to me like a situation where a condo would want to engage with their lawyer to get some advice on the specifics. Obviously, we can't provide legal advice in a setting like this tonight. But that the general scenario is the duty to accommodate applies, and in order to achieve that or meet that duty, probably some advice would be appropriate. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Okay, moving right along, conscious of time as well. So our condo corporation recently had an issue with a tenant similar to what we've discussed so far tonight. We were wondering if we're allowed to request reference checks from landlords who are also owners in the building, obviously, for tenants coming into the building. Perhaps Paul, if you can take a stab at this.
So I can address parts of that. So a landlord can ask for certain information like rental history, credit references, or credit checks. So condo corporation could potentially require landlords to provide further documentation relating to sort of a tenancy agreement. And we do have guides for landlords and tenants on our website, which I'd encourage people to look up. But I think a key point in this, though, is that tenants cannot be refused tenancy on any grounds that's protected by the Human Rights Code. So age, sex, race, disability, etc.
Thank you, Paul. I think this next one might be for you as well. How can condo boards, so this one's from an owner, how can condo board members be encouraged to sit down and speak with owners before they threaten legal action? I'm guessing this person's had this situation happen to them. Perhaps, Paul, if you want to take a stab.
You know, absolutely. So boards should absolutely take their time to investigate and explore all the options, because there can be consequences for condominium boards when you don't do so. If you rush to a legal solution without investigating, without gathering relevant information or exploring, you know, what other options there may be, you could be, as a corporation, taking a risk. And there have been cases, multiple cases at the tribunal where a condo corporation has been found to have not taken a reasonable response, essentially sort of immediately going to that legal response without trying to find that accommodation, gathering that relevant info, and as such, the cat found against them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's very important to try to resolve the issue collaboratively first, and the courts will look favorably upon that. This next one could be, I think, a Celia Paul one. How do the governing documents of my condo connect with the Human Rights Code? And then also, how do policies relating to harassment connect to the governing documents?
Shall I take a stab at it first, Paul?
Sure.
So as I said in earlier tonight, a policy can't contradict the Human Rights Code, just as any other document within the condo can't, and frankly, just as any other piece of legislation can't. So remember, the Human Rights Code takes priority over everything. I'll pass it over to you, Paul, to talk about the relationship among the documents.
Yeah, and I've seen some other questions in the chat as well. So, you know, a policy, you know, in the way we've been using it, can really be thought of as sort of a consistent, reliable framework to guide the condominium board's conduct and conclusions in decision making. So a harassment policy could outline the steps that the corporation will take if and when it becomes aware of an instance of harassment. But it's important to note, and I think this was even referenced in the chat, that, you know, a policy cannot contradict the Condo Act, or just as importantly, the governing documents of the condominium corporation, and should be supported by those documents. And it can't replace what should have been implemented as a provision of the governing documents, for example, a rule.
Got it. Okay, I think we have time for one more question. Perhaps this one can go to Ben to start, and then Paul, you can finish it off. How can condo boards manage owners who get irate because they are not receiving records?
So the irate part, we spoke about it briefly when we talked about a raging bull. And ultimately, you know, very similar when we learn as a kid, when someone throws you a punch, we naturally deflect it. So you got phrases that you can use to deflect negative words coming to you. So things like, appreciate what you're saying, sir. I appreciate you bringing this to our attention. However, this is how we're going to act on it. These are the reasons why we're going to act on it. Then you can proceed. This is again following the 5-step that we spoke about. You provide them different options. Usually those options should go in the sequence of the good option, the bad option, and then a good option. Then you confirm with them, is there anything else that I can do to gain your cooperation at this point in time? If they're still irate and they're going at it, which the likelihood is going to be less after you've done those sequences, then there's nothing much that you can do rather than disengaging. We find when you're using those deflective words like appreciate it, I understand that, oh yes, therefore, and you combine it with those steps, the severity, it's like someone having a loaded gun. You're ultimately taking that gun away from them and you're disarming them. So the objective over here to disarm that person in front of you with words.
Very nice, thank you. Paul, would you like to talk a little bit about the records piece of it?
I think that was excellent, but sort of from the other angle of the records, there certainly are a set of records that owners are entitled to. If you are not sure whether you're an owner or on the board of directors, please review our website to understand what type of records owners are entitled to. Once that's been communicated to an owner, if they're still responding, in a right manner, then absolutely, sort of Ben, I think, has just outlined the appropriate steps in dealing with them. And you can certainly look for collaborative solutions. And of course, owners are able to look to the CAT for records requests, but I think, Ben has outlined the best way to respond in this situation.
Thank you all so much, and thank you to everybody who tuned in tonight. We are unfortunately out of time, but again, thank you so much. I think this has been great. We have lots more questions, I know, but we will bundle them and put them on our website and get FAQs out so we can try to get to as many of the themes you've brought up tonight as we can. You will also, as I said, receive a communication with just a final question on whether this was helpful to you or not, as well as a one-pager on some of the themes that we touched on tonight, so that you can take those away and reference them in the future. So again, thanks very much, everybody, for joining. And before we sign off entirely, I just wanted to go to our CEO, our beloved leader, Robin, just for some final remarks.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you for your excellent moderating tonight. I just want to thank the CAO's communications and policy teams who are behind the scenes making this important event possible. But I really want to thank our expert panelists tonight. I think you'll all agree that Celia, Benjamin, and Paul gave everyone some excellent suggestions and advice. This is an extremely important and timely topic, which I know we've all been thinking about in recent weeks and months. As Alex said, the summary of resources and strategies that you heard tonight will be shared with the attendees and posted on our website. I really want to thank everyone who did join. As Alex said, almost 500 of you came and submitted questions, and you completed the polling questions on screen. And that's going to help us to identify ways that we can continue to support the condo sector in Ontario in these important areas. So thank you all. Look forward to the next webinar, and have a great evening. Thank you.